Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us on Middle East Now on I24 News. I'm Laura Cellier and these are the headlines. 7 killed in Hezbollah attacks on northern Israel in one of the deadliest days for civilians since the war began. US envoys in Jerusalem to discuss a potential ceasefire for both Lebanon and Gaza. And Israeli police break up a third spy ring linked to Iran. First, 7 people have been killed in Hezbollah missile attacks in northern Israel this Thursday. An Israeli farmer and 4 foreign workers were killed in Metula. 2 other people were killed in a separate attack close to the city of Haifa. It brings to 39 the number of civilians who have been killed in cross-border attacks since the war began, and comes as US mediators hold talks with the Israeli government on a potential ceasefire in Lebanon. More on that in a moment, but first let's head to the north of Israel. Our correspondent Baleh Sladin is standing by. And Baleh, this was the deadliest day for civilians in Israel since the attack on that children's playground in Majd al-Shams.
Definitely. When since the beginning of this escalation that some people, of course, call war, that's September, after the series of attacks against Hezbollah that led to this escalation. So we're talking about 7 people killed since this morning. You've mentioned the farmer that was killed alongside 4 other foreign workers that apparently has worked with him. There is also one more person that was injured, another foreign worker seriously injured, and he is still hospitalized until now. We're talking about the farmer, 60 years old, of course, from Metula itself, and he got the permission actually from the authorities, from the IDF today, to go back to his work in order to continue his work as normal as possible. But unfortunately, the result of that was very unfortunate and devastating, as we've seen. Also, 2 people were killed in a large barrage that targeted the area of Krayot. They were killed while they were actually also in their farm. It's the time of the year where a lot of people in the Galilee go to their olive oil season, actually, and they have been there and they were killed. We're talking about 2 more people. One is he's 21 years old, and his mother, 60 years old. Both of them are Arabs from the north, which makes also another deadly attack on Arab villages and towns in the north. And now we're talking about 5 people from the Arab community since last week, actually. And this, of course, comes along the other civilians that were killed since the beginning of this hostilities since October 8th last year. So the confrontation continues, while we're seeing that also the IDF is expanding their evacuation orders today to Baalbek and the areas in the south of Lebanon. And even rarely today, we've seen the IDF taking responsibility and announcing officially that they've targeted Radwan unit and Hezbollah compound in Syria, in South Syria, in the area of Al-Qasir. Apparently, they targeted arms storage facilities there, and the unit that is responsible for supplying or smuggling actually the weapons from Syria to Lebanon, the weapons that originally come from Iran. That's the continuous effort from the IDF to isolate Hezbollah and prevent Hezbollah from rearming after the beginning of the escalation since last September. Part of this whole effort that the IDF is doing in order to dismantle Hezbollah or damage Hezbollah's military capabilities as much as possible before any future negotiations for any diplomatic solution is reached.
Baleh, thank you very much. Baleh Sladin there up in the north of Israel. Well, a team of diplomats from the United States, including the Special Envoy for Lebanon, Amos Hochstein, is holding talks with the Israeli government in Jerusalem. They're pushing for ceasefires in both Lebanon and Gaza, and for the release of the hostages who are still being held by Hamas. Last night, a draft of the ceasefire agreement with Hezbollah was leaked to the media. Our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran, has the detail.
Signs of optimism in Lebanon as ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hezbollah make significant progress.
Honestly, I don't know what to believe anymore, but we are doing everything we can, and we must always keep trying and remain optimistic. Hopefully, in the coming hours or days, we'll have a ceasefire. In my latest conversation with Amos Hochstein, he told me we're in a better position today than yesterday.
The United States is sending to Israel 2 key officials, including envoy Amos Hochstein, hoping to seal the deal. In Cairo, CIA Director Bill Burns met with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to discuss those efforts.
2 White House officials, Brett McGurk and Amos Hochstein, are traveling to Israel to engage on issues including a diplomatic resolution in Lebanon, as well as how we get to an end to the conflict in Gaza and other regional matters.
A U.S. proposal calls for a 2-month ceasefire, during which Israeli forces would gradually withdraw from Lebanon, and Hezbollah would end its armed presence south of the Litani River. The Lebanese army will deploy there instead and will dismantle the remaining Hezbollah infrastructure in the process, while allowing Israel to continue to act against Hezbollah if needed.
We support their right to go after legitimate Hezbollah targets, but in doing so, it is critical that they do so in a way that does not threaten the lives of civilians.
Lebanese media reported Hezbollah agreed to the American proposal, including separating the Gaza front from the Lebanese front, a dramatic shift in its approach.
If the Israelis decide that they want to stop the aggression, we say we accept, but under the conditions that we see as appropriate and suitable. We will not beg for a ceasefire. We're continuing, and we're not waiting for a ceasefire, no matter how long it takes.
In the meantime, Israel continues to apply military pressure on Hezbollah, hoping to maximize achievements in the field, until a diplomatic agreement is finalized.
Well, the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, said this afternoon that the success of any ceasefire agreement with Lebanon would depend on Israel's ability to enforce it. We're here to discuss all of that. Colonel Dr. Jacques Neria is the former Deputy Head of Assessment for Israeli Military Intelligence. He's also the former Foreign Policy Advisor to the late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Good to have you with us, Jacques. And Ruth Wasserman-Land is here, former member of the Knesset, Research Fellow at the Misgav Institute for Strategic Affairs. And you are, of course, former diplomatic envoy in Cairo. Good to see you, Ruth.
Likewise.
As well. Jacques, from what you've seen of the proposal, because it was leaked in the media last night, what do you make of it? Is it good for Israel? Unacceptable. Why?
Unacceptable to the Lebanese. Impossible to the Lebanese. I mean, Israel is asking for the right of hot pursuit inside the Lebanese territory. We are talking about the sovereign state. Lebanon will never accept that. And then Israel is asking for an international force.
Lebanon or Hezbollah? Who would not?
Lebanon as a state.
Right.
And then we're talking about one of the conditions is to put some international forces on the border between Lebanon and Syria in order to prevent the flow of arms from Iran into Lebanon. This is also unacceptable to the Lebanese. And then there's the fact about we are asking the Lebanon to provide the system 8,000 soldiers. 8,000. Where are they going to take them from? I mean, the Lebanese army is deployed poorly equipped vis-à-vis Hezbollah. If you put a Lebanese platoon facing a Hezbollah platoon, in a second they will be just killed or eliminated. I mean, remember, in 2008, Hezbollah conquered Beirut in less than 3 days. And why? Because at the time, the Prime Minister Fouad Siniora, who comes from the same school where I studied in Lebanon, and asked them not to have an independent communication system, and they refused. So Hezbollah is still there, is still a power, and I don't think it will be easy to dislodge them from where they are in South Lebanon. And this is why I think that the whole talk about and there's an element. I mean, they're putting in this draft, the United Nations Security Resolution 1559. Which the Lebanese don't accept anymore. They say it's past tense. Now it's only 1701 without any alteration.
They're suddenly very keen on 1701, and they would like to enforce it. Ruth, do you agree with that?
They like to play the victim.
Do you think Lebanon will be the one to turn down this agreement?
I must say that the whole issue of a ceasefire is a little bit strange, because 1701 has been in place for the last 18 years, and so was 1559. 18 years, neither the army in Lebanon nor UNIFIL wanted to I'm not sure which one is more correct to actually uphold this agreement or this resolution, both of them. And what we have left is an armed group, obviously performing the interests of a different country, and that is the Islamic Republic of Iran, doing whatever it wants in Lebanon. I don't quite see how this is going to come through in order to make sure that what we have achieved so far by the Israeli IDF in Lebanon would be kept. This is the big question. And how will the international arena play into that? Because to prepare the military in Lebanon to be able to stand up to Hezbollah will take a lot of time, a lot of weapons, and a lot of money. So we'll have to see.
And whether or not the Lebanese government accepts it is kind of immaterial, isn't it? It depends on whether Hezbollah accepts it.
Well, exactly so. I mean, if you just remember that the day the draft was published, it was the day when Naim Qasim, the successor of Hassan Nasrallah, just talked. I mean, and then you saw one declaration, and then you saw the draft, and said that something is not right here. He was talking about the continuation of the war and how they would make Israel pay a high price on its stupidity, as he said. And on the other hand, you saw a draft that the pure intention of it is to reduce the role of Hezbollah, even to eliminate him as a military power in the South Lebanon and as a political power in the north of Lebanon.
So what's the alternative then, Ruth? Israel has to keep on fighting. Emptying out entire cities.
The alternative is to maintain the right to be able to go in every time there is a threat and to eliminate that threat. Also, there have to be an international presence between Syria and Lebanon and between Turkey and Syria. All these borders are completely open. A lot of armaments are being smuggled through them, not to mention drugs, to fund all this terrorist activity. And the international arena needs to bring about some kind of a change. Hezbollah is not going to accept defeat. That's not in the lexicon. The question is, can the funding to Hezbollah end? And how can it end? First of all, the Islamic Republic of Iran. And second of all, closing the borders, ending the smuggling. Also the smuggling of drugs via the territory of Jordan, which has become more and more used by the Islamic Republic of Iran. So the entire international arena needs to come together on this. Hezbollah is not going to pick up its hands and say, we are defeated. They're trying to regain their power to rearm and regroup in northern Lebanon.
We did have an international agreement, UN Security Council's resolution 1701. It was never enforced. That is the problem. So what is the use of coming up with more agreements and more
First, you have to defeat
if they're not
Hezbollah.
Enforced?
First, you have to defeat Hezbollah, or at least
possible?
to reduce its power. You have to reduce its power. Now, I mean, according to our Minister of Defense, 20% of all capacities are left with Hezbollah. Let's hope that by now bombing in Al-Qusayr in Syria and by cutting all the roads between Syria and Lebanon, that the flow of arms from Iran will stop. This is already something. And then there's the targeting, the continuous targeting of vehicles from the Bekaa Valley into Beirut and the South Lebanon, and those vehicles are just full of weapons, full of missiles, and this is what the IDF Air Force is targeting right now, together with commanders of Hezbollah. Now, you ask, what is the solution? The solution is to completely demilitarize the south of Lebanon, DMZ, like in North.
So IDF troops would have to continue to occupy southern Lebanon
for a certain time until an adequate Lebanese army is formed, which with American training. This is what the U.S. right now is paying the salaries of each soldier and each officer in Lebanon. This is the money comes from the U.S. Treasury. So if they're paying that, and then France promised $200 million in order to equip the Lebanese army. So let's see. By the time they will be formed, we will stay there, and then we will just have to withdraw.
All right, for now. Thank you both. Well, in recent months, Israel has restored its reputation as a military power in the region, but also as an intelligence powerhouse. There have been stunning demonstrations of these capabilities in both the attacks on Hezbollah and, more recently, on Iran. Our Matthias Imber has been speaking to a serving officer at the famous 8200 unit. Take a listen.
From now on, Naim Qassem is the new Secretary General of Hezbollah. The Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, announced on X that it is temporary. Officer T from the Military Intelligence Corps, thanks for being with us. How long Naim Qassem will be the head of Hezbollah?
This question should be directed at him, since it's a matter of decision. If you ask from the point of view of ability and capability, we can do it at any given intelligence moment. And operational, of course, as we've already proved. It depends on him. It depends on Naim Qassem how he'll function. If you ask whether the ability exists, the answer is unequivocally yes. The question whether he will be eliminated is only one of decision. If the decision is affirmative, then as we've seen so far, we are able to do it.
The real question is, when Israel eliminates commanders, they will be replaced, like the deputy head of Radwan forces, who was recently killed. How do you know who will be the next commander?
Israeli intelligence. We have, as I've said before and continue to say, we have deep infrastructure and knowledge, from the level of the most simple solider who was conscripted 2 days ago, to the level of the senior commanders. Incidentally, regarding the need to overcome the challenge of junior command or the mid-level command, in the past it was difficult. But today, as you know, Unit 8200, the units in the intelligence community, managed to crack it. And today, Hezbollah, as the reality has proven, is a very, very, very transparent organization. And therefore, we know down to the level of names, details, all the most intimate details of these people. And as you see, the moment we press the red button, bullseye.
Officer T, can you inform us about the military arsenal left to Iran after the Israeli strike?
I think that in the attack on Iran, everyone, the whole world, witnessed the ability of Israeli intelligence to be precise. The fact is, it's not only Israelis who were astounded, but John and Kate in New York, when they opened their newspaper, saw something they never even saw in the biggest James Bond movie. So first of all, I can unequivocally confirm that we wrecked a lot of Tehran's capabilities. Okay, in production, in anti-aircraft, in everything. But we showed then something else, that Tehran, in one night, was put on the same line as Beirut, Rimal, or Khan Yunis, the independence of the Israel Air Force. And again, I give credit to the precise intelligence which took out the air defenses, the independence of the Air Force to do what it liked in the skies over Iran. So Iran knows very well that it doesn't want to get involved in a military showdown with us, because we'll hit them hard. The message from this strike was much more than what we hit. We unequivocally showed in less than an hour that we had the ability to dominate their skies, that and other things. So you can say that Ayatollahs in Iran know very well that at present, the equation isn't in their favor. They don't want to get into a situation where we wait for a powerful and more massive attack, because if Tehran again drags us into a direct confrontation, we, and I'm saying this openly, we know how to turn Tehran into Beirut, Khan Yunis, and they can take a look at them. Take note that Iran's proxies are themselves wavering a bit, if you can see it. Note that if the capital was hit very lightly, then how do they put it? If the head of the snake was lightly hit, what next? Note that Iran saw Nasrallah, saw senior figures in all their proxies, like Hezbollah's Radwan force, the chain of command, were hit one after the other. In the world, especially among the proxies, and in Tehran, they understand that Iran has no cover. So Iran can say, we have ability, we have this, we have that. But at the moment, the bottom line is that they were much more aware of what could happen to Tehran if they continue and respond. If you ask me whether they will respond, the answer is with them. If they do respond, then apparently they will be very, very, very stupid. If you ask me what of their facilities was hit, Surface-to-surface missile production was hit. And think for a moment that the plane didn't only hit the building, because a building can be repaired. But to take out a missile production line, the missile has to fly exactly to the production line and destroy it, right? Look at the level of micro-intelligence these planes had.
In the Israeli series Tehran, they showed how Israeli agents are killing the head of the IRGC. Is it possible to think that reality will overtake fiction?
As we've already proved many times on different fronts, we have intelligence on everyone and everything. It's just a matter of deciding. The minute it's decided to hit Tehran, lightly or heavily, we have intelligence for both these tasks and the operational ability as well. That's what I want to tell you. The production line of the intelligence community continues working and working. The head of Hezbollah's Radwan force, his deputy, Nasrallah's replacement, who didn't get a real chance to replace him. The bank of targets in Unit 8200 and in the intelligence community is going at full steam. And we're creating new targets all the time. And in addition, not only human targets, not people, but other targets as well. Factories, convoys, commanders, take note, in charge of transferring weapons on the Iraq-Syria-Lebanon axis. We hit all relevant targets, special targets, production, logistics, the high command, junior commanders. In the end, it's all thanks to the target bank of the intelligence services who continue to create new targets, and each time it does so, replacement, a stand-in, and so on. Not only is the information and knowledge available, there's also a plan, so that when the decision to take him out is given, we know how to go about it.
Thanks for being with us.
Merci.
Matthias, Imba, there. Well, let's turn to efforts to free the 101 hostages who are still being held in Gaza. Hamas says it won't agree to any deal that doesn't mean a complete and permanent end to the war in Gaza. Jacques Naria and Ruth Wasserman land with me in the studio. So, Ruth, what's happening? Is Hamas just stringing Israel along once again? Or do you think Israel needs to do more and commit to more in order to end the war and bring home the hostages?
I think that once we had hit Hamas so hard, it is a mistake to take the remnants of what remains from their leadership and to bring them up and leverage them and to really raise them again to the position of negotiation. I think this is a mistake. Furthermore, the Hamas has not changed their stance since the beginning. They are willing, so-called willing, if one trusts them in a manner of speaking, to release all the hostages, but their number one request is to end the war. In other words, they keep saying ceasefire is no longer a word they're even willing to hear. And therefore, there's no point in speaking about a ceasefire because they are not willing to speak about a ceasefire. That's number one.
Can Israel do that? Can Israel afford to end the war in Gaza completely?
At the moment, no, because that would mean that they would rearm. The Philadelphia line would again be open for smuggling. They would regroup themselves and they would continue to do exactly what they said publicly again and again to do, which is October 7, meaning that the Israeli civilians could not go back to the villages in which they lived beforehand because they would go forward to the northern part of the Gaza Strip, which is unacceptable because that was the whole point, to make sure that Israel would not be threatened by the same terrorists. So this is an impossible avenue. But the Egyptians have a speciality, an expertise, and that's UMINT, getting information from people who are the Muslim Brotherhood. They've done that for decades. The Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood are one and the same. They can, given the task, bring the correct and very perfect intelligence as to the whereabouts of each and every one of the 101 hostages.
And are they doing that?
Well, that's the thing, that the international arena and Israel should give them the task instead of asking them to be the moderator of negotiations when they have no leverage any longer over Hamas. Their only leverage used to be those smuggling tunnels, and we've taken them away from them, rightfully so. But it left them with no leverage for moderating and for being in the negotiation process.
Do you agree with that, Jacques? Do you think that...
well, I quite agree with what was said here, but I would add on that. I would say that since Hamas has been, its military power has been destroyed. He had 24 battalions. 24 battalions do not exist anymore. The new recruits are being recruited because they have still money, and they are not trained as the Nukhba, certainly not the quality of the former terrorists. Now, I think that the Gaza Strip has been destroyed. 50,000 Gazans have been killed, and most of the leadership has been decapitated. Except a few ones. And this is how, we are facing a guerrilla warfare in Gaza. I think, and I quite agree with the fact that Hamas didn't change its position. They still ask for a total ceasefire. They still ask for a total withdrawal of Israel from the Gaza Strip before even discussing the issue of ceasefire. So this is why, facing the world, because we are attacked all the time by the world, and we are pointed at as Nazis and all horrible words that you can imagine in the English vocabulary. And I think that it is more than time to say, okay, gentlemen, we are ready to end the war if you just give back.
You think Israel should end the war?
Yeah, I think that Israel can declare. Israel can afford today, with Hamas destroyed, to declare that we are ready to end the war if you give us the 101 hostages that are with you. This formula would be accepted by the whole world, and all the onus would be again on Hamas instead of being on Israel.
Okay, all right. Thank you both. We're going to take a very short break. When we come back, Israeli police have busted yet another spy ring linked to Iran. That's the third this month. We'll have the details for you next. Stay with us.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Caleb Ben David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on I-24 News.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back. Israeli police have disrupted another spy ring linked to Iran. A couple in their 30s from the city of Lod were recruited as part of an Iranian network focusing on immigrants to Israel from the Caucasus. It's the third such case this month alone. To talk more about that, we're joined by Dr. Meir Javidanfar. He's an Iran lecturer at Reichman University. Great to see you again, Meir. Thanks for being with us. So yet another spy ring disrupted. It seems to be something of a regular occurrence. Just how concerned should we be about the presence of Iranian spies in Israel?
Of course we should be concerned. We are in a war right now. Let me correct myself. We have been at war against the Islamic Republic since 1991, when they declared proxy war against the state of Israel. And now the war is reaching its peak every month, or every 3 months. We're seeing a fresh level of strikes between the two countries. And of course, both countries want to collect intelligence and to carry out intelligence-related operations on the other side's soil. So this is something that's part and parcel of the struggle that we are involved with against the Iranians. What is interesting is that they are recruiting people from the Caucasus, from mainly Muslim countries, where there are some Jewish communities available there. And what I have to say we have to be thankful for is that the Iranians did not get the chance to take them to Iran to train them as spies, because these were all amateurs. If they would have been taken to Iran and trained in the art of camouflage, encryption, sending encrypted messages, covering their tracks, how to drive without being spotted, or how to drive without being tailed, and such important espionage training. If they would have had it, it would have been even more difficult for Israel to catch them. But from what we know, these are amateurs who were recruited by Iran, and partly, probably, one of the reasons why they were caught is that they did not go under thorough professional training in the art of espionage.
Well, there's certainly a very amateurish element to all of it, isn't there? Do you think that this is perhaps an act of desperation on the part of Iran, as they have seen their military capabilities systematically dismantled by Israel?
I think they are trying what they can, and this is what they can right now. They are trying to the best of their abilities. The country, there are many Iranians of Azeri origin. And these people live in Azerbaijan. So while they're living in Azerbaijan, or while they're visiting there, Iranians probably get one of their Azeri agents to talk to them, to convince them, to turn them. And probably what plays a major part in all of this story is greed. People who are living in Israel, they don't have a high-income job, and the Iranians offer them a large sum of money, and it's very difficult for them to turn it down, especially when probably most of them have never been to the army here, so they don't have, until now, only one of them has been in the army, that 72-year-old man from Ashkelon. They don't have much of a connection, and here, the Iranians offer them a large sum, and as the Catholic branch of Christianity has said quite rightly, greed is one of the 7 deadly sins, and intelligence agencies have successfully used it throughout the ages to recruit, and so have the Iranians.
Well, Meir, I want to ask you about another story that is linked to Iran, because today Germany ordered the closure of all 3 of its Iranian consulates in the country. That was in response to the execution of Iranian German-American citizen Jamshid Sharmad. The 69-year-old was kidnapped in Dubai back in 2020 by Iranian forces. He was executed on Monday after he was convicted on terrorism charges during a trial that's been dismissed as a sham. The German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock announced the closure of the consulates earlier.
The murder of Mr. Sharmad shows once again the terrible ruthlessness of Iran's unjust regime. Above all, It knows the language of blackmail, threats, and violence. The fact that the assassination has now taken place in the light of the latest developments in the Middle East shows that a dictatorial regime of injustice like that of the mullahs does not operate within normal diplomatic logic. It is not without reason that our diplomatic relations are at more than a low point.
So, Mayor, the Germans taking pretty robust action against the Iranians there. Do you think that was enough? And do you think the Americans perhaps should have done more?
Look, I think we are right now living at a time when the Iranians feel very cornered. They are very angry by what they see as lack of strong condemnation and pushback against Israel's actions in Gaza, in Lebanon, especially in Lebanon, and against Iran. The Iranians feel very isolated, Laura. Not even the Chinese and the Russians have condemned these attacks by Israel in a strong manner. This is really angering the Iranians. An Iranian reporter asked the spokesperson of the Iranian Foreign Ministry, why is it that America, who is the ally of Israel, has provided them with anti-aircraft system, the THAAD, but the Russians are not helping us? They're supposed to be our allies. Why is Mr. Putin, who we described in very, let's just say, unflattering term, why are we helping him every time he needs us, such as in Ukraine? So the regime is feeling insecure, it's feeling isolated. It needs a quick win, and executing this man who the regime accused of terrorism, belonging to a terrorist group, was one of the ways they could do it. The regime is worried about the Iranian public being encouraged to challenge the regime because the Iranian regime is suffering so many setbacks in this region, that it wants to establish deterrence, and I think this is why it happened. I don't think that the hardliners within the regime really care what the Germans say.
Yeah, they went for the soft target, didn't they? Dr. Maher Javid, thank you very much. Great to talk to you as always.
Thank you.
Well, it appears the Iranians do have some friends on the world stage because Tehran is preparing to sign a new defence treaty with Russia. This as part of efforts by both countries to circumvent Western sanctions. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov outlined today some of the details of that agreement, which is set to be signed soon.
The upcoming Russian-Iranian agreement on comprehensive strategic cooperation is set to become a serious factor in strengthening relations between Russia and Iran. As I said, the agreement is being prepared for signing in the nearest future. It will stress the aspiration of both countries for closer defense cooperation, as well as collaboration for the sake of regional and global peace and security.
Jacques Neria and Ruth Wasserman still with me in the studio. So, Ruth, just listening to Maher there, do you agree with him that the regime is feeling isolated? And they have said, of course, that they will respond to Israel's attacks on its military positions from a week ago.
Most certainly, the Iranian regime and the Islamic Republic of Iran is feeling not only isolated, but very, very ashamed or having its honor hurt by the Israeli victory over Hamas, one proxy, even more so the Shiite proxy of Hezbollah in Lebanon, but also the fact that what they had planned, which is basically at the heart of Shiite radical Islam, and that is the creation of a worldwide caliphate, Sharia-based caliphate, is moving away from its grip, because the Iranians, not the people, but the regime, really is looking to get a gain which will galvanize support amidst all of the Muslims throughout the world. Saudi Arabia has Mecca and Medina. The regime in Iran wants something else. Why did they call the attack, the terrible attack of the Hamas on October 7th, the Al-Aqsa flood? Because Al-Aqsa, Jerusalem, the mosque, is a symbol strong enough to stand opposite Mecca and Medina. They want to rule the Islamic world. They want to rule the entire globe, caliphate that they wish to create. And they wanted to do that with the aid of their proxies, which we are one by one destroying. Now the Israelis have hurt their own air defense systems. This makes them want to bring back the national honor, and they will try and hurt Israel in the hardest possible way. We should not be arrogant about that as well.
Do you think we're at a dangerous point here, Jacques, with the regime feeling cornered and angered by reactions on the world stage?
Well, you know, you always have to be very careful when somebody is angry, and certainly they behaves not normally. But I mean, I quite agree with the fact that, I mean, after all, let us remember that the vision of Iran, Qasem Soleimani, who was eliminated in 2020 by Trump, had announced this plan of suffocating Israel, creating a belt, a fire belt around Israel. And this belt is in fact just being destroyed. Hezbollah is being defeated, Hamas has been defeated, and there's quite the role of the Houthis is quite marginal right now, being taken care by the Brits and by the United States. So I mean, the big plan, the big design has just fallen apart. And certainly, from the Arab point of view, and the Arabs look at Iran, say, you have promised to be you are behind that plan. Where are you now? Why aren't you helping us? I mean, they have left Hezbollah to disintegrate, yeah, to the wolves, yes. And then they threw the same with Hamas. I mean, they talk all the time, but they did nothing. I mean, except for when they fired directly on Israel, and the answer of Israel was such that now, I mean, everybody exposes the fact that Iran is wide open to all incursions inside Iran, and this, of course, may bring them to a situation where they want to act and to react, maybe through terrorist activities. Certainly, I don't think that they would dare to fire ballistic missiles after the warning that the US has given only yesterday.
Oh, they will.
You think there will be a response?
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, they will make the mistake.
Yes, they will make the mistake.
They will make the mistake if they do so.
All right. Jacques Neria, Ruth Wasserman-Land, great to have you both on the programme. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, US airstrikes on Syria killed 35 ISIS operatives overnight. The strikes targeted Islamic State training camps and follow an uptick in similar attacks on the group in both Syria and Iraq. Separately, the IDF has been targeting Hezbollah-linked positions in Homs in western Syria. To talk about all of that, we're joined by Omar Abu Layla. He's the executive director of Deir ez-Zor 24. Good to have you with us, Omar. We're seeing more attacks like this, aren't we? Just give us an idea of the extent to which ISIS is re-establishing itself in Syria.
Thank you so much, Laura, for having me again. I'm still active and still strong groups and cells on the ground, especially in the northeast Syria. And I'm not surprised what the CENTCOM announced about the recent airstrikes hit these cells in the Sahara or desert in the northeast Syria. Because we, as I am from Deir ez-Zor, we witnessing the activity of these cells, especially against the SDF and the American troops. And one thing we can't forget is the main mission of the global coalition in Syria. It's focused on defeating Daesh. So since they were defeated on the ground, it doesn't mean the group it's already over or like no more ISIS on the ground. No, their technique was designed to the same Islamic State in Iraq in 2004. And I'm talking about ISIS. So when they lost the battle against the SDF and the American troops in 2017-18, they decided we are going to be as cells and we must focus on our operations against the SDF and the Americans mainly. One more thing I could add it here. Why we see now exactly ISIS so active against the American and the SDF, because we believe also the Iranian militia, or the Iranian-backed militia, on the western bank of Euphrates River in northeast Syria, they know very well this movement of these cells, but they let them cross the river to put much pressure on the American troops. And that's why we see the Americans also focusing very well on their main mission against ISIS, and that's why they attacked them recently.
Kind of a triangulation of powers between the Americans, the Iranians, and the extremists. Well, let's talk about what Israel is doing in Syria, because it has been for many years now trying to disrupt Iran's efforts to get weapons to Hezbollah via Syria, now more important perhaps than ever. How effective have those airstrikes been lately?
It absolutely work. We don't expect this militia will also be over in a couple of days or weeks, because this militia, Hezbollah militia and other militia, including the Iraqi militia and the foreign militia supported by the IRGC who are based in Syria, they are working in the mid and long term. So they still transferring and sending support, military support from Syria to Lebanon, to the fronts against Israel, but which just today, the Israelis hit them again, which is not the first or the last time. So this militia has its own strategy, like we keep trying and find any way to send all the kind of the support, despite we know very well the Israelis watching us and they know our movement, but then somehow we try to be aware of these strikes. And all the way they try to avoid or to be aware of these strikes, they couldn't do it. Just today, we talk about 5 of Hezbollah members were killed in Al-Qusayr in the countryside of Homs, which is the most important city on the border with Lebanon for Hezbollah, especially in this period. So we're expecting also the other militia, including the Iraqi militia and foreign militia, sending more support from northeast Syria. I do believe the Israelis working on this strategy as well. They do believe Hezbollah receiving huge support from Syria, and that's why they even keep sending message to the Assad regime that you cannot engage in this conflict, or you cannot stay with this militia, or you will be in a difficult situation.
Fascinating. The view from Syria with Omar Abu Layla. Thank you very much indeed, Omar.
Thank you, Laura.
Now, there are 4 days to go until America votes in a bitterly contested presidential race between former President Donald Trump and the current Vice President Kamala Harris. And as Americans head to the polls, there is a stark contrast between Jewish American voters and Israeli American voters. Our Nicole Zedek breaks it down.
It's election crunch time in the United States. And as both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump pander to potential voters, some of those voters are abroad, in Israel.
We estimate there's something like 500,000 potential American voters here in Israel.
Both candidates have been speaking out about their goals for the region.
To see the Middle East get back to peace, and real peace, but a peace that's going to be a lasting peace. And that's going to happen. I feel really, truly confident it's going to happen, and I believe it's going to happen soon.
Listen, as it relates to the issues in the Middle East, and in particular in that region, it has never been easy. But that doesn't mean we give up, okay? It is always going to be difficult. It does not mean we give up. We can't give up.
The 2024 U.S. presidential elections are being described as some of the most divisive in recent history. And U.S. politics have a big impact right here in Israel. So who do people here want to see in the White House next?
Donald J. Trump.
I've already voted for Donald Trump.
I'm voting for Kamala Harris.
I voted Republican down the line, but for president, I did not fill in.
A mixed bag on the streets of Tel Aviv. But that's not an indication of Israel as a whole.
Probably based on past election cycles, and particularly this one after October 7th, I'd say over 90% will vote for Republicans.
We don't have firm statistics. No one has ever done real polling of Americans living in Israel. It's roughly 50-50 based on the canvassing that we do on the street. It's not the 80-90% that the Republicans overseas will tell you.
While there may not be clear numbers on American voters in Israel, at least 2/3 tend to vote Republican. And that's in line with the most recent Hebrew media poll, which shows who Israelis want to see in the White House next.
Like an Israeli, I would like to vote to Donald Trump.
For me, it's Trump. It's better than Harris.
If you could vote, who would you be voting for?
Kamala Harris.
2 out of 3 Israelis want to see another Trump presidency, which is the exact opposite of Jewish American voters, who tend to vote Democrat.
I think that the things that motivate Americans here in Israel are very similar to the things that motivate Americans, Jewish Americans in the United States. I think that Israel's security is probably a little bit higher on their issues list than it is in the United States. But for Americans and Jewish Americans in the United States, anti-Semitism is higher on their list than Israel.
You know, many of our voters who here in Israel voted Democrat when they were in the United States. And when they came here, they saw things differently. What did they see differently? They see their interests from the standpoint of the state of Israel and the Jewish people in a very clear way. For the Jewish people, it's a matter of survival.
It comes down to priorities. For the larger percentage of voters in Israel, their main priority is the safety of their home, the Jewish state.
The most important thing in my entire life is Israel. And I love Israel. And I think that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance would do the best job possible for the Jewish people and the state of Israel.
For others, Israel isn't their number one voting issue.
I think that Trump is unstable. I don't like his views on women. And although I'm also an Israeli citizen, I think Kamala's views on Israel are good enough for me, and just more important not to vote for Trump.
But across both parties, there seems to be a consensus.
I think that Israel's security is most safe when it is bipartisan.
I would love us to return to a time when support for Israel and the Jewish people was truly bipartisan. That's not the case now.
While there may be a contrast in who voters believe will be better for Israel, the only way to have a say is to vote.
In this election, if you care about Israel, if you care about the Jewish people, whether you're Jewish or not, your responsibility, your duty to Israel, to America and the world, is to come out and vote.
As the U.S. elections will have impacts around the world. Reporting in Tel Aviv, Nicole Zedek for I-24 News.
Women in Afghanistan have all but disappeared from view. Now their voices must remain silent as well. The Taliban has ruled that women and girls are forbidden from praying loudly or reciting the Quran, even in front of other women. It's the latest in a long line of draconian laws that the Taliban has enforced since its return to power following the US withdrawal in 2021. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Mariam Wardak. She's the founder of the NGO Her Afghanistan. Thank you very much for being with us, Mariam. So women now must not raise their voices even in prayer, even in front of other women. It's as though the Taliban is trying to erase women completely, their bodies, their voices, their souls. How do you explain this?
Well, I don't think that there's a proper explanation for their actions. However, I think that what they are doing is not a surprise, and how they are behaving is something that Afghan women are adapting to, not to their liking, but because Afghan women are absolutely resilient.
How are they resisting this?
There's different level of resistance. I mean, you have Afghan women who are out doing protests or speaking against it and visually showing to the world that they stand against the Taliban policies. But then you have Afghan women who are showing a more silent resistance. So they show resilience and adaptability by continuing to educate their daughters in private schools or in secret. Others in rural areas have taken a more creative approach in creating an informal network to support one another with the limited resources that they have, and creating jobs for themselves by actively finding opportunities online. So they have a lot of women who have opened online businesses selling Afghan clothing, or they are in tech, or they have other forms of connections to the outside world, finding them online opportunities.
That's astonishing, and it is astonishing how brave they are. I mean, given the role of the international community in the mess that is Afghanistan, do you think that these women are getting enough support and enough help from the international community?
Well, I think that we're in this current circumstances because of the international community, and the fact that the international community lacks to take any acknowledgement or responsibility for that is quite embarrassing. Afghan women have still managed to leave the country when they wanted through assistance of some of their international partners. And there are several international organizations and advocacy groups such as International Refugee Assistance Program, I believe, Amnesty International, and various other women's rights groups that have been working to help women still on the ground there. And then you have a lot of people taking private initiatives. You have my organization, organization that helps individuals on a one-on-one basis, whether that's education or finding employment, or finding a support group for one another. Because in circumstances like this, when they have seen some level of freedom in the past 20 years, and then all of a sudden being constrained, having a support group is extremely important. There are a lot of other issues, new migrations. You've already had many people who were internally displaced in the country, and now that they are leaving to be somewhere internationally, or like going to Pakistan or trying to flee to another country, you have a migrational issue as well that's taking place. However, these groups have often found their ways to survive, and that's one of the things that we know of Afghan people, that they know how to survive in challenging situations. I know I say this as a brave thing, but it's very, very much unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, it is, as I say, astonishing courage, astonishing bravery, and very creative as well for women to find a way to get around these hellish laws. Mariam Wardak, thank you very much indeed, and I encourage anyone who wants to help Afghan women and girls to look up Mariam's NGO, Her Afghanistan. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us today. Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's show. Do stay with us here on I24 News. Khaled Ben-David is up next. Good night.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News app today.
7 killed by Hezbollah rockets in North Israel as U.S. envoys meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu on plans to stop the fighting across the Lebanon border. We'll have the latest. An officer of the IDF Intelligence Corps sits down to talk with I-24 News and details how the unit has succeeded in targeting top Hezbollah figures and sensitive military sites in Iran. As Election Day approaches, Kamala Harris is slated to draw the majority of Jewish votes in the U.S., but among American Jews living in Israel, it's Donald Trump who likely has the advantage. We'll explain why. This is the Rundown on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben-David. It was a day of deadly rocket attacks in Israel's north, with 7 killed by Hezbollah fire, the highest daily total of civilian fatalities since the Majal Shams massacre of a dozen children last July. This morning, 2 rockets from Lebanon hit an apple orchard outside the village of Metula, right on the Israel-Lebanon border, killing Omer Weinstein of Kibbutz Dafna and 4 foreign agricultural workers. And this afternoon, a woman in her 60s and her son in her 30s were killed when a rocket hit an olive grove in the Haifa-based suburb of Kiryat Atta. This as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was meeting in Jerusalem with U.S. Special Envoys Amos Hochstein and Brett McGurk over a ceasefire proposal to end Israel's war with Lebanon. Netanyahu opened the meeting by saying the main point is not an agreement on paper, but Israel's ability and determination to enforce the agreement and thwart any threat to its security from Lebanon so that residents of the north can return securely to their homes. Well, for more, let's go to our correspondent, Balia Sladin, who is in the Haifa area, and a difficult day, both there around Haifa and, of course, in the Metula area as well, Balia.
Yes, definitely a devastating day. Just an hour ago this afternoon, I was in the area of Shfar'am where the rocket fell in that area, and it's designated actually as an open area. Both of these people, the mother and her son, were actually in their agricultural land. It's the olive season here in the Galilee, starting in the beginning of each November, and apparently they were there, of course, working in their land, and that rocket fell and killed them both, and also injured their like the husband and the father there as well. He was lightly wounded in that attack as well. And also this afternoon, the 2 missiles that were fired from Lebanon fell in the area of Metula. Also a farmer, 60-year-old farmer, he's a resident of Metula, and apparently 4 of the foreign workers that work with him were killed in that attack. Another foreign worker was severely injured. He's still hospitalized until this moment. It's not clear whether there is whether his condition is life-threatening or not. So this is the deadliest day, especially after the beginning of this escalation in September. Some would call it even war on Israeli civilians here, and this continues, of course. And by the way, we're mentioning this open area. Of course, the Iron Dome, usually when it sees, or of course the fighters, the air defense fighters, when they see that the rocket will fall in open areas, most of the time they don't intercept it because of the cost of the interceptor itself. And this time, of course, that rocket fell in an open area, but unfortunately these 2 people were killed as a result of it. Same thing in Metula. We're talking about fighting in El Khiyam, which is just north of Metula, and that's exactly what Israel is trying to prevent, this short range, this very close distance between Metula and El Khiyam, that southern Lebanese village. That's why we're saying that the IDF is continuing their efforts to conquer or reach the area of El Khiyam, and the fighting still continues there. And we've seen today also the IDF in a rare statement officially stating that they have targeted Hezbollah's compound in southern Syria, in a Syrian territory. The target there is a weapons storage facility and a command center that belongs to Radwan unit, the same unit that operates in southern Lebanon, part of the effort that Israel is doing in order to isolate Hezbollah, prevent Hezbollah from rearming, and of course this whole whole effort of dismantling Hezbollah or damaging Hezbollah as much as possible before any diplomatic agreement is reached.
All right. Yeah, this is the autumn harvest season in Israel, especially in the north there, and a lot of people out working in the fields. And this is one of the flaws, as you mentioned, Balia, kind of, if you want to see that way, of the Iron Dome system. Doesn't pick up those missiles that are heading to largely agricultural areas. Balia Sladin there in the Haifa Bay area. Thank you for that. As we mentioned, the White House's two top envoys to the Middle East met with Prime Minister Netanyahu today for talks on possible ceasefires in both Lebanon and Gaza and the release of hostages held by Hamas. The push comes as significant progress was reached over the past 24 hours, perhaps signaling some optimism of a potential diplomatic resolution in Lebanon. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has more.
Signs of optimism in Lebanon as ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hezbollah make significant progress.
Honestly, I don't know what to believe anymore, but we are doing everything we can, and we must always keep trying and remain optimistic. Hopefully, in the coming hours or days, we'll have a ceasefire. In my latest conversation with Amos Hochstein, he told me we're in a better position today than yesterday.
The United States is sending to Israel two key officials, including envoy Amos Hochstein, hoping to seal the deal. In Cairo, CIA Director Bill Burns met with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to discuss those efforts.
Two White House officials, Brett McGurk and Amos Hochstein, are traveling to Israel to engage on issues including a diplomatic resolution in Lebanon, as well as how we get to an end to the conflict in Gaza and other regional matters.
A U.S. proposal calls for a 2-month ceasefire, during which Israeli forces would gradually withdraw from Lebanon and Hezbollah would end its armed presence south of the Litani River. The Lebanese army will deploy there instead and will dismantle the remaining Hezbollah infrastructure in the process while allowing Israel to continue to act against Hezbollah if needed.
We support their right to go after legitimate Hezbollah targets, but in doing so, it is critical that they do so in a way that does not threaten the lives of civilians.
Lebanese media reported Hezbollah agreed to the American proposal, including separating the Gaza front from the Lebanese front, a dramatic shift in its approach.
If the Israelis decide that they want to stop the aggression, we say we accept, but under the conditions that we see as appropriate and suitable. We will not beg for a ceasefire. We're continuing, and we're not waiting for a ceasefire, no matter how long it takes.
In the meantime, Israel continues to apply military pressure on Hezbollah, hoping to maximize achievements in the field, until a diplomatic agreement is finalized.
And joining us in the studio for more, Ambassador Danny Ayalon, the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. and a former deputy foreign minister, and our correspondent, Zach Anders. Danny, the U.S. clearly putting a major effort, maybe connected to the U.S. elections, I don't know, trying to resolve certainly that conflict in Lebanon and maybe link it also to the conflict in Gaza. Are the circumstances right for this kind of perhaps grand end of conflict agreement?
Certainly, you know, the proximity to the elections next Tuesday certainly makes it intertwined, the politics and the strategy and the foreign policy. It would be a great coup for the administration and, as a result, also for Kamala Harris's campaign if they did manage to bring about ceasefire in Lebanon, which may lead into a ceasefire in Gaza, preferably, of course, with the deal on the hostages. And right now, the U.S. is putting everything that they have on the table.
But is it enough?
I'm not sure. That's the whole thing. You know, if we look back now for the entire time, you know, more than a year, we see that the U.S., unfortunately, has failed to bring any resolution to any of the conflicts, not with Iran, not with Hezbollah, not with the Houthis, not with Hamas. So I doubt that anyone would really yield now to an administration which is going away or outgoing.
Right, a lame duck.
A lame duck. And everybody would want to see who will be the next president, and they would want to give him, you know,
right.
this sweets, as we call it here.
Right. Well, we'll talk a little more about the election later on in the program specifically. Zach, certainly you see this deadly civilian toll today. Israel, of course, would want to bring the end to that fire, bring the residents back. But I'm sure the military does not want to leave South Lebanon until they have made sure that they have really completely crippled the military infrastructure Hezbollah has done. Now, you spent a lot of time in the north. How close is the IDF to achieving that?
I believe that we're very close, and that was an assumption that I came to days ago. Then we had some more in-depth conversations with some folks in the know, and the conclusion that we are getting to is that the IDF believes they have essentially won along the front line where it stands now. These villages that are closest to the Israeli-Lebanon border, the ones that were highly fortified, Hezbollah's first line of defense. That first line of defense has fallen, and that was what the IDF was set out as that first goal here. Again, we're still having this described by the IDF and the political establishment as localized, limited raids and to demilitarize the border towns. The IDF is in almost all of those border towns, or they have already rolled through them, and now they're staged and at a point where they could go deeper inside Lebanese territory and move north and head towards these, you could consider them second-tier village towns and different structures that Hezbollah has, but they're deeper. They're, instead of 2 miles along the border, they're 4 miles deeper inside the territory. So what we're hearing right now, and some of the conversations that we're having, is that the IDF feels like they have accomplished the goals that were originally set out for them by the security cabinet, that they have created somewhat of a buffer, and now it is up to the political establishment for a political decision whether or not to continue advancing in Lebanon or to pull back, call it a day. But that infrastructure largely in those frontline villages and towns has been destroyed.
Well, we should just mention Prime Minister Netanyahu saying the key is getting some guarantees that Hezbollah will move back to the 1701, will pull its forces back beyond the Litani River, and that it's free to act if it sees otherwise.
Yes, this is what we call the hot pursuit. By the way, this was already put in previous agreements with the Palestinians after the Oslo, after the withdrawal from the towns in Judea and Samaria. Also, we had this very important clause. Here, I would say, from the military point of view, as Zach said, the returns are diminishing. I mean, the bulk of, let's say, the attack is behind us. Most of Hezbollah capabilities are destroyed. So now, actually, if you keep the military in, the risk for some complications and some, could be friendly fire or whatever, they would like to stop now as we are ahead. And I believe now there is also a possibility because of not only just Hezbollah is compromised position, but also politically there are all the other sects in Lebanon which are surrounding basically Hezbollah, trying to isolate it and bring it down from power.
And real quick, that the new leader of Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, is not a military man. And this is a major point that the IDF is pushing in these moments, is that they're up against now an organization that's no longer run by any military brilliance.
All right, well, let's hope for perhaps a chance for a diplomatic solution here. Now, the IDF Military Intelligence Corps, which did suffer a tremendous blow on the October 7th attack, has scored some major bounce-back coups of late, especially its role in providing invaluable intel in the targeted killings of Hassan Nasrallah and other top Hezbollah officials, and the IAF's airstrike recently carried out against Iranian military sites. Matthias Inbar, defense correspondent of our I-24 News French channel, had the opportunity to speak with an officer of the IDF intelligence branch who's involved in these operations. His identity we cannot reveal for security reasons. Here's that discussion.
From now on, Naim Qassem is the new Secretary General of Hezbollah. The Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, announced on X that it is temporary. Officer T from the Military Intelligence Corps, thanks for being with us. How long Naim Qassem will be the head of Hezbollah?
This question should be directed at him, since it's a matter of decision. If you ask from the point of view of ability and capability, we can do it at any given intelligence moment. And operational, of course, as we've already proved. It depends on him. It depends on Naim Qassem, how he'll function. If you ask whether the ability exists, The answer is unequivocally yes. The question whether he will be eliminated is only one of decision. If the decision is affirmative, then as we've seen so far, we are able to do it.
The real question is, when Israel eliminates commanders, they will be replaced, like the deputy head of Radwan forces who was recently killed. How do you know who will be the next commander?
Israeli intelligence. We have, as I've said before and continue to say, we have deep infrastructure and knowledge, from the level of the most simple solider who was conscripted 2 days ago, to the level of the senior commanders. Incidentally, regarding the need to overcome the challenge of junior command, or the mid-level command, in the past it was difficult. But today, as you know, Unit 8200, the units in the intelligence community, managed to crack it. And today, Hezbollah, as the reality has proven, is a very, very, very transparent organization. And therefore, we know down to the level of names, details, all the most intimate details of these people. And as you see, the moment we press the red button, bullseye.
Officer T, can you inform us about the military arsenal left to Iran after the Israeli strike?
I think that in the attack on Iran, everyone, the whole world, witnessed the ability of Israeli intelligence to be precise. The fact is, it's not only Israelis who were astounded, but John and Kate in New York, when they opened their newspaper, saw something they never even saw in the biggest James Bond movie. So first of all, I can unequivocally confirm that we wrecked a lot of Tehran's capabilities. Okay, in production, in anti-aircraft, in everything. But we showed then something else, that Tehran, in one night, was put on the same line as Beirut, Rimal, or Khan Yunis, the independence of the Israel Air Force. And again, I give credit to the precise intelligence which took out the air defenses, the independence of the Air Force to do what it liked in the skies over Iran. So Iran knows very well that it doesn't want to get involved in a military showdown with us, because we'll hit them hard. The message from this strike was much more than what we hit. We unequivocally showed in less than an hour that we had the ability to dominate their skies, that and other things. So you can say that Ayatollahs in Iran know very well that at present, the equation isn't in their favor. They don't want to get into a situation where we wait for a powerful and more massive attack, because if Tehran again drags us into a direct confrontation, we, and I'm saying this openly, we know how to turn Tehran into Beirut, Khan Yunis, and they can take a look at them. Take note that Iran's proxies are themselves wavering a bit, if you can see it. Note that if the capital was hit very lightly, then how do they put it? If the head of the snake was lightly hit, what next? Note that Iran saw Nasrallah, saw senior figures in all their proxies, like Hezbollah's Radwan force, the chain of command, were hit one after the other. In the world, especially among the proxies, and in Tehran, they understand that Iran has no cover. So Iran can say, we have ability, we have this, we have that. But at the moment, the bottom line is that they were much more aware of what could happen to Tehran if they continue and respond. If you ask me whether they will respond, the answer is with them. If they do respond, then apparently they will be very, very, very stupid. If you ask me what of their facilities was hit, surface-to-surface missile production was hit. And think for a moment that the plane didn't only hit the building, because a building can be repaired. But to take out a missile production line, the missile has to fly exactly to the production line and destroy it, right? Look at the level of micro-intelligence these planes had.
In the Israeli series Tehran, they showed how Israeli agents are killing the head of the IRGC. Is it possible to think that reality will overtake fiction?
As we've already proved many, many times on different fronts, we have intelligence on everyone and everything. It's just a matter of deciding. The minute it's decided to hit Tehran, lightly or heavily, we have intelligence for both these tasks and the operational ability as well. That's what I want to tell you. The production line of the intelligence community continues working and working. The head of Hezbollah's Radwan force, his deputy, Nasrallah's replacement, who didn't get a real chance to replace him, The bank of targets in Unit 8200 and in the intelligence community is going at full steam. And we're creating new targets all the time. And in addition, not only human targets, not people, but other targets as well. Factories, convoys, commanders, take note, in charge of transferring weapons on the Iraq-Syria-Lebanon axis. We hit all relevant targets, special targets, production, logistics, the high command, junior commanders. In the end, it's all thanks to the target bank of the intelligence services who continue to create new targets, and each time it does so, replacement, a stand-in, and so on. Not only is the information and knowledge available, there's also a plan, so that when the decision to take him out is given, we know how to go about it.
Thanks for being with us.
Merci.
Well, there is no denying Israel's achievements, battlefield achievements, its military and intelligence successes of late, but can those successes be translated into diplomatic and political achievements regionally? Well, as the U.S. tries to craft a comprehensive peace agreement, talks specifically focused on reaching a hostage release for Gaza ceasefire deal are reportedly underway, continuing in Cairo. Unfortunately, Hamas officials are said to be still demanding a full cessation and withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, rejecting the latest proposals put forth by mediators for a more limited deal to release 4 to 14 hostages for truce that could be from a few days up to 2 months. Now, a solution to the Gaza war was also on the agenda of a conference today in the Saudi capital, Riyadh, attended by regional and international diplomats, in which the main focus was on reviving the peace process towards a two-state solution. Here's what the Saudi foreign minister had to say there.
The establishment of a Palestinian state is not tied to whether or not Israel accepts it. It's tied to the principles of international law. And I will say that the United Nations resolutions that led to the establishment of the State of Israel clearly had a Palestinian state in view as well. Unfortunately, many false starts, many pronouncements of a near deal for a ceasefire in Gaza, only to be disappointed. And my understanding is that we have in most of those instances where the talks eventually collapsed, it has been because there have been new requirements or new demands added on the part of Israel. I hope that at this point we can finally reach a ceasefire that spares what is left of Gaza, the people of Gaza, and gives them an opportunity to finally see some peace.
Danny, I wouldn't say a two-state solution is in the cards in the near future, but certainly Israel's a Saudi role in steps towards normalization, maybe a Saudi role and that of other Gulf states, for example, in a day after Hamas in Gaza are essential. But it does seem, at least publicly, that Saudi position is kind of hardening on linking that to progress on the Palestinian front.
Yes, the key word is publicly, Kalev. Although the rhetoric of the Saudis has changed since the 7th of October last year, before that they talked about a deal or a normalization with Israel for better conditions, economic conditions for the Palestinians. Since the 7th of October, they're talking about a Palestinian state. What does it mean? Nobody knows. I mean, their interests have not changed in terms of allying with Israel against Iran, against Al-Qaeda, against future challenges in the water availability or food security.
And a regional defense alliance backed by the United States, which was
But they need a cover. So the cover is the demand, or so-called demand, of a Palestinian state. I believe that it would be sufficient for Israel to say that they are willing to enter a political process with the Palestinians, with some time in the future talking about maybe a two-state solution without any commitment of a date and, of course, conditions, which will be, I think, hard for the Palestinians to swallow. But Israel cannot and will not give up the first and foremost, if there is a state of Palestine, it would have to be demilitarized. They will have to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, and of course many other things that are also part of possible deals.
Right, hard for the Palestinians to swallow, hard for perhaps the current coalition in Prime Minister Netanyahu's government to swallow as well.
The key is, what Netanyahu said about the goal in Gaza is to demilitarize and de-radicalize. And this is also about the Palestinian Authority, to de-radicalize their curriculum, what they're teaching their children as to.
Like the incitement in the textbooks, and we've reported on that many times. And of course, a key component of that is the future of Gaza. We talked about Hezbollah having been defeated, let's say its military capability being, in a way, brought down to a level that Israel can live with it in Lebanon. But of course, this is even more so and much more so with Hamas in Gaza, and whether the battle in Gaza has reached there, especially after what we saw just now in Jabalia, for example, Hamas reasserting itself in the north.
Which I found the public messaging of the IDF to be a bit confusing at times, because several weeks ago we've got Admiral Hagari standing saying that essentially Hamas has been defeated, that now we're fighting pockets of guerrilla forces that are recollecting, and we're attempting to stop them from recollecting. That's what we hear is happening in Jabalia, that the effort to go back into northern Gaza by the IDF is to dismantle what is remaining of these bands of Hamas men who are not operating with unit cohesion. They don't have strong leadership. They're not communicating with one another. They are a guerrilla force. And that is what the IDF says they're continuing to combat in northern Gaza. Where this massive equation really hits a dead end right now is, can the IDF even leave if we still got hostages inside the Gaza Strip? So whether or not the IDF believes they completely defeated the military elements of Hamas and kept them from being able to get back together as a fighting military force, there's still enough of those.
Right. The return of the hostages and freeing. Nothing moves forward on the political level, diplomatic level, until that goal is achieved. Ambassador Daniel Alon, Zach, please stay with us. We're going out for a brief break. We'll be right back.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back to the Rundown on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. The U.S. election is only days away now, and polls continue to show a virtual deadlock between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, including in the key swing states that will likely decide the vote on November 5th. Now, every ballot will count in those states, including every Jewish vote, including among the hundreds of thousands of American immigrants to Israel who are still eligible to vote. Now, in the U.S., the Democrats usually enjoy an advantage of some 70 to 30% over the GOP when it comes to the Jewish vote. But here in Israel, that is not necessarily the case. Our Nicole Tzedek takes a look at where the Israeli-American electorate is likely to place its support in the presidential race.
It's election crunch time in the United States. And as both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump pander to potential voters, some of those voters are abroad in Israel.
We estimate there's something like 500,000 potential American voters here in Israel.
Both candidates have been speaking out about their goals for the region.
To see the Middle East get back to peace, and real peace, but a peace that's going to be a lasting peace. And that's going to happen. I feel really, truly confident it's going to happen, and I believe it's going to happen soon.
Listen, as it relates to the issues in the Middle East, and in particular in that region, it has never been easy. But that doesn't mean we give up, okay? It is always going to be difficult. It does not mean we give up. We can't give up.
The 2024 U.S. presidential elections are being described as some of the most divisive in recent history. And U.S. politics have a big impact right here in Israel. So who do people here want to see in the White House next?
Donald J. Trump.
I have already voted for Donald Trump.
I'm voting for Kamala Harris.
I've voted Republican down the line, but for president, I did not fill in.
A mixed bag on the streets of Tel Aviv. But that's not an indication of Israel as a whole.
Probably based on past election cycles, and particularly this one after October 7th, I'd say over 90% will vote for Republicans.
We don't have firm statistics. No one has ever done real polling of Americans living in Israel. It's roughly 50-50 based on the canvassing that we do on the street. It's not the 80-90% that the Republicans overseas will tell you.
While there may not be clear numbers on American voters in Israel, at least 2/3 tend to vote Republican. And that's in line with the most recent Hebrew media poll, which shows who Israelis want to see in the White House next.
Like an Israeli, I would like to vote to Donald Trump.
For me, what I think for me is Trump is better than Harris.
If you could vote, who would you be voting for?
Kamala Harris.
2 out of 3 Israelis want to see another Trump presidency, which is the exact opposite of Jewish American voters, who tend to vote Democrat.
I think that the things that motivate Americans here in Israel are very similar to the things that motivate Americans, Jewish Americans in the United States. I think that Israel's security is probably a little bit higher on their issues list than it is in the United States. But for Americans Jewish Americans in the United States, anti-Semitism is higher on their list than Israel.
You know, many of our voters who here in Israel voted Democrat when they were in the United States. And when they came here, they saw things differently. What did they see differently? They see their interests from the standpoint of the state of Israel and the Jewish people in a very clear way. For the Jewish people, it's a matter of survival.
It comes down to priorities. For the larger percentage of voters in Israel, their main priority is the safety of their home, the Jewish state.
The most important thing in my entire life is Israel. And I love Israel. And I think that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance would do the best job possible for the Jewish people and the state of Israel.
For others, Israel isn't their number one voting issue.
I think that Trump is unstable. I don't like his views on women. And although I'm also an Israeli citizen, I think Kamala's views on Israel are good enough for me. And just more important not to vote for Trump.
But across both parties, there seems to be a consensus.
I think that Israel's security is most safe when it is bipartisan.
I would love us to return to a time when support for Israel and the Jewish people was truly bipartisan. That's not the case now.
While there may be a contrast in who voters believe will be better for Israel, the only way to have a say is to vote.
In this election, if you care about Israel, if you care about the Jewish people, whether you're Jewish or not, your responsibility, your duty to Israel, to America and the world is to come out and vote.
As the U.S. elections will have impacts around the world. Reporting in Tel Aviv, Nicole Zedek for I-24 News.
And still with us in studio, Ambassador Danny Aiello and Zach Anders, and joining us from Washington, D.C., our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. And I think we can agree, Danny, the days of bipartisanship on Israel is, at least for now, have gone with the wind. And I do agree, for example, with Mark Zell. I mean, definitely the American immigrant community, of which I'm a part of, was going to be leaning towards Donald Trump. But a lot of that is predicated on the feeling this is, in a sense, the same Donald Trump of his first term. And there's no doubting what he did in that term, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the Golan, supporting Israel's efforts against Iran. But the question is, Donald Trump is anything, he's unpredictable. And whether a second term Donald Trump will be the same recipe, I'm not so sure. I don't know if that will be the case.
Well, first, I would say that the Israeli sentiment is not necessarily on, I mean, generally.
Right.
Not necessarily on his idiosyncrasies, I would say, or his behavior or character, but more on his policies. And his policies towards Israel were the best ever of any other president. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the Golan Heights, and of course defending, that's also something that has not been very much talked about, but he really, the U.S. administration under his stewardship, really defended Israel in international organizations.
Forums,
whether it's the UNESCO or others, they would withdraw or funds and all that. So I think it is quite natural for Israelis to go with what they know, you know, based on the experience. Whether this will be the same for another term, if he gains another term, it's of course something that nobody can tell. One thing is certain, that he also, you know, let's say if the real bone of contention between Israel and the United States is the Palestinian issue or a Palestinian state, we have to remember that Trump also believes in a Palestinian state. Actually, his deal of the century included a Palestinian state on 70% of Judea and Samaria. So no one can tell, you know, what if there would be much difference in terms of their grand policies between Democrats and Republicans. I think the most important thing for us is really to go back to the bipartisanship that we have so much enjoyed until pretty much Obama came to power.
Right. Might need a couple of election cycles for that. I want to go to Mike in Washington, Mike, because as we said before, Donald Trump, it's true everything we've said about his past record, and Danny has highlighted is true. At the same time, we see things Donald Trump, during this campaign, he didn't do in the last time. For example, talking about peace in the Middle East, much more, even talking about, and we saw his relations with Benjamin Netanyahu have been kind of up and down since he left the White House.
Yeah, everything's been up and down with Trump since he left the White House. Listen, Israelis tend to go with what they know. I think it's true for most people. You go based on history. You can't always look into the future 5 steps down the line and say, well, this might happen, that might happen, and therefore this is the choice we're going to make today. It's much more abstract. And I think something that's missing from this discussion as well is not only, you know, who do you prefer in the election, but who are they going to surround themselves with? You know, Trump was surrounded by an immense number of pro-Israel people in his first term that had his ear. Jared Kushner, David Friedman, Jason Greenblatt, the list goes on, and they were able to kind of mold a very unknowing Trump in the world of foreign policy. This is not an area that Trump dealt with. He's not a diplomat by nature, certainly, and his experience was a business experience. And it goes way beyond real estate, dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, no matter what somebody wants to tell you. Now that he has that experience under his belt, he's dealt with big agenda items in the foreign policy realm. Trump is a guy who says, well, now that I know, I know. Don't try to tell me things that I already know. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if he wins the White House, who he will surround himself with in terms of foreign policy and whether they'll be amenable to what Benjamin Netanyahu wants to do, or maybe more toward the middle of the road, more American isolationism, staying out of foreign policy, quagmires like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think that will play more of a role than just the unpredictability of Trump himself.
Right. And, of course, the Democrats and Kamala Harris, they also have to dealing with the issue, and they are also dealing, for example, now for the first time with the Arab American vote. And as we said, every vote in the so-called swing states is going to account in this election. And that includes the Midwest state of Michigan, which is home to over 200,000 Arab Americans, with many of these traditional Democrats saying they're either going to boycott the ballot box or even vote for Trump over Harris in response to the Biden administration's support for Israel in its wars against Hamas and Hezbollah. Let's hear from some of those residents of the town of Dearborn, Michigan.
They don't care about us. I don't care about either. So I'm not voting for either. For now, 1,000,000% I'm not voting for Harris. And I'm undecided at this point. I am 99% sure that I'm voting for Dr. Jill Stein because she's guilty in a genocide. She's supporting the funding. She goes on public TV. They send text messages saying, I'm pro-Israel, I'm supporting Israel. They're saying, I'm supporting the killing of your people. Why would I vote for her? I voted for her and Biden 4 years ago. Now I feel guilty. Never again I'm voting for, probably Democrats are pro-war. This is the history of Democrats. They like war. I'm not voting for Democrats anymore, for sure.
Arabs in the community, a lot of them are interested in voting for Trump because that way it shows the Democratic Party that they can't continue their foreign policies. It's just not, people don't agree with what's going on. A genocide should not be funded. Partly, I do think that people are taking out their anger on Kamala Harris when it comes to the election because of Joe Biden. But at the same time, I also think she is complicit because she is the vice president and she has some sort of power.
Mike, how big a problem is that Arab American vote for the Democrats, for Kamala Harris, especially there in that key state of Michigan?
It's so difficult to tell right now, and people sometimes when they're on camera, you and I know better than anybody, they tend to let their emotions out, but when push comes to shove, they might make a more rational decision in the ballot box. I think some of this has been overplayed. Let's go back a couple months to the Democratic National Convention. Remember when that was supposed to be completely overridden by protesters? That was supposed to be the huge story. They're going to go out into the streets. They're going to riot. That would be the story of the DNC. A few hundred, maybe 1,000 people showed up. There was nothing there. It just went away. And so we hear a lot of noise right now, but the actual impact of what it will have on Election Day, it might be overblown again. Is it reason to worry? Of course, because that election in Michigan is going to be one on the margins. But sometimes those loudest voices don't always carry the power in the end. And it's interesting who's turning out as a surrogate for Kamala Harris in the waning days. Of course, we've seen big names like Barack Obama, but also former President Bill Clinton. He went to Michigan not with a pro-Arab message or even kind of a message to massage that particular issue. He went back to the days of Oslo. He went back to the days where he said, even before that, where he said, listen, I killed myself to give Arafat a deal. He wouldn't take it. This was the message he had for Michiganders. Let's give it a listen.
I understand why young Palestinian and Arab Americans in Michigan think too many people have died. I get that. But if you lived in one of those kibbutzim in Israel, right next to Gaza, where the people there were the most pro-friendship with Palestine, most pro-two-state solution of any of the Israeli communities, were the ones right next to Gaza. And Hamas butchered them. And so then the people who criticize it are essentially saying, yeah, but look how many people you've killed in Ritalin. So How many is enough for you to kill to punish them for the terrible things they did? That all sounds nice until you realize, what would you do if it was your family and you hadn't done anything but support a homeland for the Palestinians, and one day they come for you?
What do they call President Clinton, Kalev? The explainer-in-chief? He went and explained it. Not exactly sure if he was talking to a receptive audience there, but it was very notable that he's not shying away from the issue or really trying to go gently at it in the waning days here. And it'd be interesting what the Harris campaign, and we've asked for a reaction from them to those Clinton remarks, if that'll generate any heat in the waning days here of the election.
Yeah, no, I think that may be a bit nuanced for most American voters there. Israelis will understand what he's talking about. But, Zach, I wonder, from our perspective, here we are in Israel. We come from the U.S. The tendency in Israel is to think that this is, the be-all. And as Mike said, this is the major issue. It is the major foreign policy issue, clearly. But at the end of the day, how much of an impact is this ultimately going to have on deciding this election, as opposed to the classic American issues, economy, some of the cultural, social issues that have been at the forefront in recent years?
Mike brought up an interesting point that reminded me that when this war started, I had two very close friends that swore off Biden. They said they weren't going to vote for Biden. They carried through and said they weren't going to vote for Kamala when the candidate switch took place. I followed up, and within the last week, their tone has changed considerably. And the fear that they have for a Trump reemergence, another Trump term, has turned them around on an issue, this anti-war issue that they were sticking with for an entire year. There's going to be a large segment, I think, of the American electorate that is looking at this war and as Israeli issues as peripheral, as that they don't truly affect, like you mentioned. The main things I think people are going to, and the things that we have conversations about just hours ago, is they're going to the ballot boxes right now for or against their candidate. And it's just one candidate in this race. It's incredible. There are Democrats that are going to vote against Trump, and there are Republicans going to vote for Trump. There's not a huge segment of the electorate, I believe, and this is all anecdotal, but this is just what I'm feeling, is there's not a huge segment of the electorate that's going to the polls trying to elect Kamala, because that's, who they were super excited for. Everyone is going to the polls in the next week for one candidate to either vote him in or vote him out and try and put him in the history books, and that's all anyone cares about right now, is this man who has captured the American zeitgeist. He is America now. This is who we are. He represents us, and we deep down represent him somehow. So November 5th, it's going to be great.
We'll see how the results comes out.
So basically, Kalev, what Zach is saying, that this election is about Trump. That means it's a referendum about Trump.
In a way. And in a way, it reminds me in one way about Israel, in which every election that we've had in the past dozen years has also been really a referendum about one man also.
Right. And we have to remember, Kamala was actually the default.
Candidate in that case, yes. Okay, well, gentlemen, it'll certainly be interesting. Mike Wagenheim in Washington, thank you for joining us. We'll be talking a lot with you in the coming days. Coming back to Israel, yet more cases exposed today of Israeli citizens arrested on charges of spying on behalf of Iran. It is alleged that Lod residents Raphael and Leila Guliev, both aged 32, gathered intelligence on Mossad security sites at the behest of the Tehran regime. They also allegedly shadowed an academic at a security think tank with the intention of recruiting an assassin to carry out her murder. In another case, Bnei Brak resident Asher Benjamin Weiss is accused of tracking an Israeli nuclear scientist who the Iranian regime wanted to take out, passing information on his movements to a would-be assassin from East Jerusalem. This follows the recent arrests of several Palestinians and Israelis of Azeri origin on charges of being recruited for espionage by Iranian agents. And, gentlemen, this is alarming to hear now that Israelis, or people who hold Israeli citizenship, were actually taking part in potential assassination murders of, for example, scientists and academics. Obviously, payback, Iranian payback for alleged such Israeli operations.
Right, this is unheard of, and I think what we see is a major effort by the Iranian intelligence to pay in kind, after they have been penetrated and they are so vulnerable. So they are trying to actually kind of even the score. But I think their attempt is quite cumbersome, quite crude. Sure. What they're doing is actually throwing a big net, of trying, with thousands of people, different ways, through social media mostly, and trying and catching some poor souls that either are miserable financially or even psychologically, or really some misfits. And it shows for the Shin Bet that they're really doing a great job by, picking them one by one.
The surprising thing about this is that you would think that Iran would line these up decades ago, that you would have sleeper agents that were ready to go at a moment's notice, but instead we see after October 7th, they put a lot of energy and effort into recruitment and trying to build up a network, a cell in Israel, and that doesn't seem like it makes much sense.
Unless, of course, there are agents that we are unaware of, so we don't have to know.
Yeah, but by the results, God forbid. Absolutely. But, no Israeli was assassinated.
Right, we haven't seen covert operations.
We haven't seen any covert
and only cyber operations. We spoke about U.S. politics. Let's turn to Israeli politics now. Prime Minister Netanyahu and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich today presented the government's proposed budget for 2025. Beginning what will be months of debate and political mudslinging. Now, the budget plan is equivalent to some $200 billion in spending and must be approved by March 31st, or this government would fall. And the budget battles have already started. The proposal, which cuts spending and raises taxes to pay for Israel's costly wars, was attacked by the Defense Ministry officials as having cutbacks that will hurt wounded soldiers and the families of fallen fighters. But here's Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking today at the budget meeting.
We are in the midst of a war. Our security depends on the security services, the IDF, and other elements which are properly equipped, both spiritually and materially. Our security also depends on the economy. We cannot have a strong military if we have no way of financing it. Therefore, security depends on the economy, but the economy also depends on security. If it is possible to strike the heart of our cities, our industry, and our citizens, then it is clear that our economic capability will be harmed. Therefore, security and the economy are interdependent. On the other hand, we recognize that we have new objectives that we will need to meet. These objectives are mainly directed, of course, to the security sphere, which we must reinforce. It is clear that there is no economy without limits. There is no economy without restrictions. If you give to one place, you unfortunately need to take from another.
Danny, Mr. Ambassador, we should also mention your extensive resume. Of course, you were a member of Knesset, a political party. You were part of that torturous budget proposal process in Israel. But the stakes are certainly higher this time. And we should added to that, or the threat by the ultra-Orthodox parties who say they won't vote for the budget if there is not some resolution towards the issue of enlistment for the ultra-Orthodox, in which the public debate certainly seems to be going against them, just even in recent months, to say the very least.
Exactly. This is the crux. And Netanyahu, maybe smartly, politically for him, he really, dodged the bullet, and he didn't really specifically talk about the major, let's say, issue that is concerning all Israelis. That is the draft, and also all this money, what is called, the political money that is given to the ultra-Orthodox communities, the Haredim. And these two things are something that if he will not address, I'm afraid not only the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, will not vote with him, but if he leans towards their way, then many in the Likud will revolt, because many in the Likud understand the needs for an equal opportunity to every Israelis, meaning no one should be exempt from the draft.
Right, and we should even note Finance Minister Smotrich himself spoke out on this issue recently because of the disproportionate casualties among the national religious sector who his party is supposed to represent, and so many of them have fallen in combat, especially in recent days.
Sure, and then everything will go back to also the very, I would say, rudiment issue of the curriculum in the yeshivot.
Right.
That, we have, it's been a, from time immemorial, this discussion about bringing those Haredim students up to speed with reality, taking English, taking math, which they are not now, and preparing them for the labor market.
And contributing to the economy. All right, well, we'll see if that Prime Minister Netanyahu can resolve that Goodonian knot, as they say. Ambassador Danny Alon, Zach Anders, thank you for joining us on this edition of The Rundown, and thank you for being with us this evening on I-24 News.